So I'm going to get started. We're recording today's session so that we can share it with folks who aren't able to join us live. My name is Rabbi Melanie Labov, and I have the honor of serving as the executive director of Shomer Collective. For those of you who are new to us, I'm going to give just a bit of background about our work. Shomer Collective was founded a few years ago. We're a startup nonprofit being incubated by the good folks at the Natan Fund. Our work came out of the realization that too many of us, our families, our friends, people in our communities, wind up in crisis around end of life because we haven't planned for, we don't talk about the inevitable often enough, early enough. We wind up in situations where we didn't know what mom would have wanted. She's no longer able to communicate, and the siblings don't agree on how to answer the doctor's questions of, do you want a feeding tube or do you not want a feeding tube? And out of these experiences, Shomer Collective emerged. The word Shomer in Hebrew means guard or watch. And traditionally, the Shomer is the person or people who take turns sitting with the body from the time of death through burial, with the idea of guarding the body, but also providing sacred accompaniment, sitting with the body. As we understand traditionally, the soul begins its journey of separation from the body at the moment of death onward. Over a period of time. And our work is meant to evoke that image of sacred accompaniment. How can the wisdom of Jewish tradition accompany us as we do the hard work of confronting our mortality? So, as many of you know, about half of our work is aimed toward individuals and families with programs like this, public education programs, a lot of information referral, concierge, helping people find what they need at the time that they need it in a way that's accessible to them Jewishly. And about half of our work is geared toward professionals and organizations, really helping to bring the conversation about death and dying back into the Jewish communal square, I like to call it. If we might imagine a few generations ago that our ancestors were closer to death in a way, meaning that death occurred in the community, it occurred in the home, and we weren't as great a remove as we are today from the experience of death. It may have been the case 3, 4, 5 generations ago that they still pushed the kids out of the room when grandma was dying, but it was the case that the kids weren't 3,000 miles away in college and completely removed from the experience of a family dealing with the end of life of a loved one. And so our work is really to benefit from what Jewish wisdom has to offer. And that's the focus for today's program. So I'm going to start by acknowledging that today, April 16th, is National Healthcare Decisions Day. You may or may not be aware of that, of the many days that exist, whether they're hallmark holidays or holidays created by organizations or days marked on people's calendars for a specific purpose. But I'm sure you've probably heard of the old adage that nothing in life is guaranteed except death and taxes. And so that was said by Benjamin Franklin some time ago, and his wisdom remains true for us today. Yesterday was tax day here in the United States, and tomorrow is still not guaranteed for any of us. National Healthcare Decisions Day was established by the wise folks as part of the positive death movement that's emerged here in this country. It was established as the day after tax day to remind us of the reality that just as we need to take care of the business of our taxes being part of society, so too should we pay attention to take care of the business of the reality that we will all eventually succumb to death. And in their case, the planners of National Healthcare Decisions Day to use this day, today, the day after tax day, as a day to think about our healthcare decisions. The palliative care doctor, filmmaker, movement leader, Shoshana Ungerleider always says it's always too early to think about death until it's too late. And so if we can use a day after a day on the calendar in which most of us are taking care of something that we have no choice but to take care of, what would it look like if we use the day after to take care of something that some of us think we have a choice whether or not we need to deal with end of life? But you know what? It's going to happen whether we plan for it or we don't plan for it. And it is the case that we'll be in a better position if we at least acknowledge and start to think about it. So our plan for today is I'm going to offer a little bit more introduction to ground us in Jewish wisdom. We'll do some text study, some Torah study together. As we're a small enough group, I'm going to invite people to participate. I'll read a piece of text and ask some questions and welcome you to respond in the chat or even to unmute yourself when the time comes so that we can have a conversation relating the themes of Passover to our work of contemplating our mortality. And so that's what we're going to do for about the next hour or so. I just want to acknowledge the comments that are coming in the chat on that topic, that yes, in fact, I imagine it's on many of our minds, all of the death and suffering happening due to the war against Hamas, which isn't really what this is about, as it says in the chat, but how could we not think about it? So I just want to name that as something that weighs heavily on our communities and on many of our souls as we head into the journey of liberation over Passover. And so you're welcome, no matter what your political beliefs, no matter where you are geographically, no matter where you are Jewishly or not, to be part of our conversation today. So I'm going to get us started with a little bit of background about Passover. For those of us who have managed to avoid any preparation so far, I just want to set the stage for it. It's in this spirit of acknowledging that today is National Healthcare Decisions Day on the American calendar. On the days before the great holiday of Passover, we want to bring these themes together. So we'll journey over the next hour through specific Jewish wisdom, the wisdom of our tradition, the wisdom of this community that we're going to create here today together as we explore these themes of Passover with an eye toward living more fully in the moments of our lives in the face of death, right? Tomorrow is never guaranteed. We never know. And so how can we live more fully who we are, how we want to be on this journey of life? And so the word Seder, from the Passover Seder, has become shorthand for the ritual dinners that many of us will sit at next Monday night, next Tuesday night, or at any number of other nights for those who participate in thematic dinners around Passover, separate from the first night or two. The word Seder has come to be known as the ritual dinner that we have around Passover. But the word Seder in Hebrew literally translates to mean order. And so it's with that idea of setting an order that we get started. At the beginning of the Seder, we often sing the order of the Seder. We teach it to the children in Jewish educational contexts to let them know that there's an order we're going to go through. This is what you can expect. Some of you may have learned it or sing it at your Seder tables as Kadesh Orchatz Karpas Yachatz. I'm married into a family that has a different tune. I didn't know you could have more than one tune to this song. And this is the tune that we will sing, God willing, at our Passover Seder with our family in Israel next week. Kadesh Orchatz Karpas Yachatz. It's a completely different tune. And this is to acknowledge that we may have different ways of celebrating our holidays. Some of us may have more Eastern European, Ashkenazi twists. Some of us may have Sephardic or Middle Eastern customs at our Seder. But the idea is we're all brought together with a specific order of what's to happen. And by singing at the beginning of the Seder, this is the order of the Seder, these are the steps we're going to take, we know what's going to come. We know what to expect. We know what's expected of us at the Seder table in general. And at the heart of the Passover Seder is the Magid section, the retelling of the story of our collective liberation from the hands of oppressors, and a tracing of the geographical journey from one place, Egypt, toward another, the land of Israel, the promised land. And the word in Hebrew for Egypt, Mitzrayim, translates as narrow places. So I'm putting a few words out there from Hebrew to English to set the stage, this idea of order, a prescribed order, knowing what's expected of us. And Mitzrayim, narrow places, as themes we're going to dive into. We're coming from Egypt, Mitzrayim, narrow places, toward a more expansive place, we hope. And that's the purpose of experiencing the Passover Seder, the telling of our story. Another perspective, our Passover Seder tells the story of our journey from narrow places toward more expansive places, toward freedom from that narrowness, right? We talk a lot about the theme of freedom around Passover, freedom from enslavement as it happened in the story, toward freedom from what has held us back. So I want you to think a little bit about what places in your life feel narrow, perhaps as they relate to this idea of confronting mortality, of planning for the rest of your life. Where do things feel narrow? Where are the places that we get stuck in having conversations and starting conversations? And what would expansiveness look like? What might freedom from that narrow place look like? Thinking together as a team here at Shomer Collective about these ideas and coming up with today's program, we were thinking about Jewish wisdom that we wanted to lift up, connecting our work to the holiday of Passover. And we explored this idea of order, the order of the Seder, of having your things in order, is what we say in our business when it comes to planning for end of life. We talked a little bit about freedom, the freedom of knowing that your plans are in place, right? I have my advanced care directive. I participated in the What Matters caring conversations about end of life. I've appointed my healthcare proxy. I've written my wishes in the form of a living will. All of my important people have access to this document. I have shared it. They know where it is. Even if the events in your life going forward don't unfold exactly according to these plans, there's still some sense of liberation that we can feel for having had the conversations and recognizing that tomorrow is never guaranteed. And so today's text study, we're going to explore these ideas with the goal that it is time, as we think of it, to make end of life conversations part of our Passover liberation story. What do I mean by that? This is not about how to bring up the conversation about life support while saying, please pass the matzah, Uncle Joe, right? Over the Seder table necessarily. You may choose to do that. We're not prescribing that. But rather, today's an exploration of Torah, of Jewish wisdom about Passover that we hope will serve to encourage us as we head into the upcoming holiday as a time to access the liberation that comes from confronting mortality, right? I know I'm repeating that idea, but I really want you to take it in. Can we access liberation by confronting our mortality, from talking about our wishes, from normalizing conversations about hard things with those who are closest to us, with those who we are going to literally break bread, unleavened bread with at the table? The story of our collective liberation from the narrows includes a whole lot of wandering on the journey, right? It's not always direct. This is not a one and done conversation. Not a, please sign these papers, mom, and everything will be just fine, right? You'll get what you want. When the Israelites set out on the journey, there was no guarantee they would make it out. And indeed, not everyone does. Death happens. We can make all the plans that we want, but yet there's no promise that our lives will unfold according to the plans that we have written. But we can pretty much guarantee that if we have no plan, if we don't take the steps of talking about an end of life, if we don't recognize the realities of our mortality, it's going to be a more difficult journey to live through life with potential for ending up in crisis. So for those of you who prepare for Passover by cleaning, by sweeping up the crumbs, by removing the chametz, the leavened products from your home, from your kitchen, the things that are weighing us down from experiencing the taste of freedom, we encourage you to use that literal cleaning as a metaphor. Even if you don't clean out all the leavened products from your home, even if you just clean up before company's coming, or you clean yourself up before you're going to someone else's home to celebrate together, use that idea as a metaphor for the internal housekeeping we need to do to remove the blocks of talking about and planning for end of life. And so to get us started on the internal housekeeping, we're going to start with the Torah reading for the first day of Passover. It's traditional that we read a section of Torah each week and specific sections on each holiday. And the section that we're going to look at comes from the book of Exodus, chapter 12, verses 21 to 51. We're going to explore the text in English today for the purposes of accessibility so that we can all be literally on the same page. If you're someone who wants to be able to look at the Hebrew original along with the English translation, we recommend the Safaria website, or if you have an old-fashioned book right with you, you can look at the book of Exodus, chapter 12. We're going to start at verse 21. So here we go. We're in the book of Exodus, chapter 12, verse 21. This is setting the stage for where I want to focus us today. Moses summoned the elders of Israel and gathered up the senior-most people of the community and said to them, go pick out lambs for your families and slaughter the Passover offering, right? Hearkening back to when we were a sacrificial cult. And this is how we were to worship God with animal sacrifices. Take a bunch of hyssop. If you've never seen that word before, it's one of the ingredients in the modern spice za'atar that many of us like to eat with pita and olive oil from the Middle East. Take a bunch of hyssop, so a spice, dip it in the blood that is in the basin and apply some of that blood that is in the basin to the lintel and to the two doorposts, right? This is the marking of the doorpost. None of you shall go outside the door of your house until morning. Stay safe behind the doorposts that you've marked with blood. For God, when going through to smite the Egyptians, will see the blood on the lintel and the two doorposts, and God will pass over the door and not let the destroyer enter and smite your home. Right? So Moses is instructing the elders of the community. This is how we're going to take care of our community. There's going to be something bad happening. You should go and mark your doorposts, stay inside, stay safe. And then we read, you shall observe this as an institution for all time, for you and for your descendants. And when you enter the land that God will give you as promised, you shall observe this rite. So here we have a command from Torah that even when we make it to the other side, we should continue to observe this. And when your children ask you, what do you mean by this, right? You shall say it is the Passover sacrifice to God, who passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when smiting the Egyptians, but saved our houses. Those assembled then bowed low in homage. And the Israelites went and did so, just as God had commanded Moses and Aaron, so they did. Right, so here we have Moses communicating the commandment. This is what needs to be done to keep you safe in this difficult time. And the idea that we should carry forth this story with us into the future in anticipation that our children are going to ask, what are you talking about? And we're going to tell them what happened. In the middle of the night, God struck down all of the male firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sat on the throne, to the firstborn of the captive, who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the cattle. And Pharaoh arose in the night with all his courtiers and all the Egyptians, because there was a loud cry in Egypt, for there was no house where there was not someone dead. That part that I bolded there at the bottom is what I want to talk about now. Pharaoh arose in the night with all his courtiers and all the Egyptians. All the people on Pharaoh's team got up because there was a loud cry in Egypt, for there was no house where there was not someone dead. I'm curious what you make of this idea. The loud cry makes me shiver. Thanks, Victoria, for popping that in the chat. What do you make of this idea of a loud cry that everyone hears, for there was no house in which there was no one dead? Or what questions do you have about it? How does reading about this loud cry in a place where there was not a home in which there was no one dead make you feel? How does it make you feel to acknowledge there was a place in which there were homes in which there was not someone who had died? How does that make you feel?
It's a reversal. I'm used to the Jews crying, and all of a sudden it brings to the forefront the suffering and the pain of of the so-called enemy camp.
Yes. Thank you, Miriam. Miriam has pointed out this idea that the pain of death is universal, right? Pain can be felt on all sides. Doris, I see you raising your hand.
I was actually thinking of survivor guilt.
Say more. What does that mean?
that means that why are we being spared, and what like it's so scary that we're being spared now, but would we be spared? And we do feel bad for those families that have all had children who died, because we too have children who died. So I think we have survivor guilt, and we're scared because we don't know what's going to happen next. And I do think the slaves had some empathy for the Egyptians. Like it wasn't so that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. It seems to go along with what Gila put in the chat, that it feels real in a way that it didn't before the pandemic and before the current war. And I wonder if that resonates for some of you. I see hands up. Carol, let's take you next.
Yeah, it feels horrific to me to consider that the death of all these children is in some way in order to save my life.
Thank you, Carol, for sharing. So we see the pain of the Egyptians in the text, and it helps us to access our own feelings of pain when death occurs to anyone. Marla, I see your hand up.
I'm bringing that into today because there were so many innocents that had nothing to do with Pharaoh's court. They were just a part of the land, and they are experiencing the tragedy, similar to the Palestinians experiencing the tragedy, because they're being used as human shields. So they're losing life.
Thank you, Marla. Thank you, Marla. Yes, we see innocence affected in these situations, both the situation that we're looking at in Torah and today's situation, right? We need not look back further than just Saturday night to see the one victim who was in the news from that barrage and miraculous events that followed, to see the innocents who were affected in a time of intentional killing and war. In our case, what we're seeing in the Egyptians' loud cry is the recognition that no one will escape it. No one will escape death. There's a loud cry, perhaps a piercing cry, upon the discovery of death, right? Think about it. Even for those of you who are doing the most planning possible, mom's wishes are documented and it's hung on the refrigerator, and the lawyer has it, and the cousin has it, and the neighbor has it, and the aide has it, and you have it. It's still a shock to the system. Even if mom's wishes are honored in every way possible that you intended to honor her wishes, there's still that moment of recognition, of shock, of difference between life and death. And so I hope that starting in this place, in this piece of the Torah reading that we're instructed to read every year on Passover, helps us to remember the feelings that we're having now around the reality of death, how much it shocks the system, the cries that are heard with the recognition that someone is no longer alive, and to use those feelings to think about how we're living our lives today, how we want to continue to live our lives today. It's the case that no one here, right, in each of our homes will not experience the death of someone that we know or the someone we love, and ultimately our own death. So this first section of the text sets the stage, the universality of death. It is an experience that every human will have, the shock, the pain. We're going to continue on in the reading to the next 3 verses. And so we continue. This is Exodus chapter 12, verse 31. Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron in the night and said, "Get up, depart from among my people, you and the Israelites with you. Go worship God as you said. Take your flocks and your herds as you said, and be gone, and may you bring a blessing upon me also." The Egyptians urged the people on, impatient to have them leave the country, for they said, "We shall all be dead." I have a lot to say about this one. I'm going to stop here. I'm curious what you think about this. I'm going to leave it up on the screen so you can take it in again if you want to read it over. This idea that upon the shock of realizing the plague of the death of the firstborn, Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron in the middle of the night and said, fine, I'm going to let your people go. Go and take all your things with you, but make sure I get a blessing out of it. And this is really the verse that I want to focus on. The Egyptians urged the people on. The Egyptians urged the Israelites, go. The Egyptians were impatient to have the Israelites leave the country, for they said, we shall all be dead. We shall all be dead. What do you make of that? Why were the Egyptians encouraging the Israelites to go once Pharaoh was motivated? Gila says we all think we can control when and how death comes, right? Would that we could. That's not part of our reality. Acceptance and realization that we all can and could die. Thanks, Doris. For me, what struck me was this idea that death could be catching, that the Egyptians wanted the Israelites out because they had seen and felt and experienced the plague of the death of the firstborn, and they needed the death to stop. And it was their hope, their prayer, that by getting rid of the people who were connected to the reason the death was occurring, that they might spare themselves, that they might stop the plague from catching, if death can be catchy.
You know, a couple people mentioned children, but the reality is the firstborn were people of all ages. And in one household, they could have lost practically every member of the family. And I'm not sure that anybody had the wherewithal in the moment to say, oh, it's the firstborn. They saw kids, they saw old people, they saw middle-aged people, you know, people of all ages were dying all around them. And so it would make sense that they think it's catching. You know, they
Yeah.
can't figure out the purpose or the reasoning behind it.
Right. Thank you, Elizabeth. That's a helpful perspective. I hadn't thought of it that way, but I'm the firstborn. I'm married to a firstborn. We have a firstborn. If my folks were in the house and each one of them were a firstborn, which they're not, but if they were, or my aunt and uncle were in our home to celebrate Passover together, those firstborns, there's a lot of firstborns, right, of every age. When I think about the next generation of firstborns after me, they're quite young. Steve, I see your hand raised.
I'm just curious, it just struck me now, that when Pharaoh issued his decree about the firstborn, where were the Egyptian people to say that's not right? In other words, like, didn't God issue a warning as well? But like, why did the Egyptian people not uprise and say, hey, they shouldn't do that? You issued a decree. How long from decree to action? And you never hear about anybody's reacting to that decree. So I'm just trying to get some context.
Thanks, Steve. You know, this is what I love about doing Torah study in a group or with other people is that you hear different perspectives. Questions come up that you may never have thought of before. And so Steve's wondering, and now it makes me wonder, where were the Egyptians? Where are their voices? What we know about Torah study is that not all of the voices are captured there. Where this comes out most often is that we don't often have the voices of women in the stories that we teach as Jewish tradition under that umbrella, right? A lot of the voices that we hear tend to be male voices. And so here we're wondering where are the voices of the Egyptians not captured in the text itself. One of the purposes of Torah commentary, later people who come along and write commentary about Torah stories, is to try to add some questions and guesses and answers to what's not written on the page. And so that's what we're doing for ourselves today, is to create contemporary commentary, wondering what wasn't happening, what wasn't recorded in the story as we have inherited it, that was happening in the reality. Where were the people who were rising up and saying this is wrong? Rabbi Justin says, so at least the rabbinic minority view says Egyptian firstborn females also died in the plague, right? A more expansive view was that it wasn't limited to just men. And thank you for citing that from the Women's Torah commentary, Rabbi Justin Kerber, right? Those of us who are interested in hearing voices that aren't traditionally included in what we hand down as Jewish wisdom now have sources to consult, things like the Jewish Women's Commentary. We also see comments in the chat, children are our future. The firstborns to die means that the future is going to die. Gila says it reminds me of the COVID quarantine or fears in the 80s and 90s around AIDS. or my grandmother whispering cancer because it might be catching, right? This idea that we don't talk about something because it might be catching, we want to push it out of our view. The Egyptians are pushing the Israelites out the door. Get the hell out of here. So what that we had you, as workers and building our places during the years of enslavement. But here it's time for you to go because we have seen what can happen. And there's a question direct to me where only the male firstborn struck down. As we understand it from the text, that's the answer. Yes, the male firstborn were struck down. Some of us may see a more gender expansive understanding of what firstborn means, but as we understood it was the male firstborn. And so this idea of death being catching, in this case, as a result of a spreading plague, in our case, we don't want to be near death because it might happen to us. Right? Think about that in your contemporary context. What does it look like in your life to avoid being near things that you worry might be catching? It was certainly the case for COVID isolation, for the protection of life, right? Especially those of us who have underlying conditions, may still have underlying conditions, may still be living in ways that are different than we once lived. How does it impact the way that you live in terms of avoiding death? Maybe you are a religious gym goer because it's your belief that if I go to the gym every day, I won't suffer the heart attack that took my uncle at a young age because heart disease runs in my family, right? What are the things that you do that you don't realize you might be doing because of an underlying fear of death? Well, actually, I like my friends at the gym and I like to feel good. And after I have a run on the treadmill, the endorphins are up and it makes me feel good. I'm not doing it necessarily to prevent an early death. I'm doing it for the positive benefits. Doris, from a very personal example, when my son died for unknown reasons, people would cross the street not to have contact with us. How many of us have had that experience of coming back into community after something bad happens in our own family, the death of a child, the suffering, an accident, and having people avoid us because they don't know how to talk to us. They don't know how to deal with us. They don't know how to confront their own feelings of fear. Could it be catching? I don't know what to say. I feel incompetent, right? There's this whole idea that we don't know how to talk about death. And that's what our work is about. That's why we're here. It's to normalize this conversation. Here we have the people in the Torah. We're dealing with a plague of death. How do we use that to help us figure out how do we talk about death? Miriam asks, can the loud Egyptian cry also be a protest by the people against the Egyptian government that is an obstinate and disregards the dangers of plagues that have befallen the nation, that ignores warnings from Moses? I love that idea, Miriam. Thank you for being my teacher today. That the cries heard that we have recorded in the Torah, sure, I'm interpreting them as the cries of shock at the sight of seeing so much death. Miriam's seeing them perhaps as protests by the people against the Egyptian government who wouldn't let the Israelites go, right? Where do we look outside of what's written in the text to find other ways to see things to make it relevant in our lives? What other questions do you have about this idea of death being catching? How might you use this piece of wisdom to move from a narrow place? I don't know how to talk to you, Doris. I'm so sorry that your child died, into coming and sitting next to you. I may not have anything to say to you, but if I see you, I'm going to come and to sit next to you, to be with you in your pain, right? Think about the wisdom of Shiva visits. For those of us who have participated in the mitzvah of the obligation, the responsibility of comforting the mourners, the obligation, the responsibility is to show up. It's to show up. It's not to do anything more than to show up. We walk into the Shiva home, the door traditionally is left open so that we don't have to ring the bell. It's a little harder with the way some of us live these days, but traditionally the door is open. We walk in and we sit until we're spoken to. We don't say, hi, so good to see you. I'm so sorry for your loss. The commandment is to sit until we're spoken to. And once the mourner starts speaking, often then we get to hear of their pain, stories of better times. And what we say traditionally are words of comfort before we leave. Hamakom yenachem etchem, may you be comforted among the other mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. A recognition that in your pain, Your pain is singular to your experience, but you as a mourner are not the only mourner. You are part of a community of mourners, right? That idea of showing up at Shiva to let people know that they're not alone. How might we use this wisdom of moving from a narrow place, the experience of so much death, toward a more expansive place, right? I don't know what to say, but I know my presence will make a difference when it comes to talking about and planning for end of life. How do we move from the narrow places we might be stuck today? Right, still haven't redone my advanced care plans. My kid is about to turn 21. I got stuff to do. What's keeping me back? Why am I stuck in this narrow place? What's going to help make it more expansive? What's going to get me to the feeling of freedom of, finally got that paperwork done, right? So I welcome you to take this question with you, using this idea from this piece of Torah to help move you from narrowness towards more expansiveness. And the third piece that I want to share is the last piece of the Torah reading for the first day of Passover. It's a little long. I'm going to read it to you in its entirety here. And so the people took their dough before it was leavened. Here we get to the matzah, right? They're on their way out. The Egyptians have pushed them out the door. They took their kneading bowls, wrapped in their cloaks upon their shoulders. The Israelites had done Moses' bidding and borrowed from the Egyptians objects of silver and gold and clothing. And God had disposed the Egyptians favorably toward the people, and they let them have their request. Thus they stripped the Egyptians. The Israelites journeyed from Ramses to Sukkot, about 600,000 fighting men on foot, aside from non-combatants. Moreover, a mixed multitude went up with them, and very much livestock, both flocks and herds. And they baked unleavened cakes of the dough that they had taken out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, since they had been driven out of Egypt and could not delay, nor had they prepared any provisions for themselves. Right, so here we have the whole journeying with the bread on our back, not enough time for it to rise, right? This is the centerpiece of the story of the leaving of Egypt, the way we tell it to the children, didn't have time, we're on a rush, on our way out the door. We got a little bit more detail by reading it in context. We were encouraged to leave, lest this plague, the death all around us might be catching. And it continues, that was for God a night of vigil to bring them out of the land of Egypt. That same night is God's, one of vigil for all the children of Israel throughout the ages. God said to Moses and Aaron, this is the law of the Passover offering. No foreigner shall eat of it. Okay, we're moving in a different direction with what's contained in the Torah here. But any householder's purchased male slave may eat of it once he has been circumcised. So the sacrifice can't be eaten by people who are outsiders, but someone who has some kind of insider status, people who are part of our clan and have taken certain steps to be part of our clan, can eat of it. No bound or hired laborer shall eat of it. If it shall be eaten in one house, you shall not take any of the flesh outside the house, nor shall you break a bone of it. So you need to eat it in a certain way, in a certain place. The whole community of Israel shall offer it. Everyone should make a sacrifice. If a male stranger who dwells with you would offer the Passover to God, all his males must be circumcised. Then he shall be admitted to offer it. He shall then be as a citizen of the country, but no uncircumcised man may eat of it. So this is like membership rules. Who's an insider, who's an outsider, having to do with circumcision and status, right? Those details are a little less important. Here's the part I want to focus on. There shall be one law for the citizen and the stranger who dwells among you. There shall be one law for the citizen and for the stranger who dwells among you. And the Torah reading continues and concludes, and all the Israelites did so as God has commanded Moses and Aaron, so they did. That very day, God freed the Israelites from the land of Egypt, troop by troop. Right? So we see the beginning, the plague, the end of the reading, freedom. We're on our way out. We took unleavened bread with us. And this curious phrase, there shall be one law for the citizen and for the stranger who dwells among you. When we make sacrifices to God, when we make our offerings of thanksgiving, who gets to eat it? Who is sustained by that act? There shall be one law for the citizen and for the stranger who dwells among you. What do you make of this idea, one law for the citizen and for the stranger? For everyone, people like us and people not like us. Does it make you think of anything else we discussed just a little while ago? Carol, go right ahead.
Well, I'm a little confused because I thought we just read that it is not for everyone. Now
Good.
they're saying it's the same one law for both. So I'm
Right.
confused.
Good. Good. I'm glad you're confused. I'm not praising your confusion. I'm welcoming in this reading that it's not clear. In one place it says this, in another place it says that. How do we understand it? What's it talking about? Which is to say, Carol, yes, you were reading it exactly as we intended, right? That the sacrifice to God can be eaten by certain people, certain classes who have done certain things, but not by others. The Torah tells us that. And then we have this curious statement. There should be one law. We're not sure what that applies to, that statement. There should be one law for all people. What do you make of this confusion? We have certain things, certain acts, certain commandments that certain types of people have to do in one way. Other people may not have access to. Questions about status. But then the Torah records this idea that there should be one law for all of the people. We're not sure who all of the people are, who qualifies as all the people. It reminds me of what Miriam said earlier, the universality of death, right? How does this universal idea that everyone is at risk? The Egyptians pushed us out the door once Pharaoh said, go, because they were afraid, because death could come to anyone at any time. Thank you, Rabbi Justin. Death is the ultimate universal law. So in order to tie all the themes together, my reading of that verse, that confusing verse, as Carol has helped to highlight for us, is this reminder that even if we don't understand exactly what the intention was in those words in the Torah, there should be one law for all the people, of what we just read, the universal experience of the fear of death. Everyone was afraid to die. We were afraid to die if we continued as slaves in Egypt, the Israelites. We're afraid to die because your God has just created a plague of death in our communities, the Egyptians. It doesn't matter what side we're on, we're afraid of death. It's human nature to fear death. And here we have a reminder that should be one law for all the people. Everyone should do something in response to this universal realization that we are all mortal. We don't know how we're going to go, whether it's the plague of the firstborn, if we were part of the Egyptian people, we're going to die of old age on the journey through the wilderness as Israelites, right? We're not all going to make it. We don't know how we're going to go, when we're going to go. But the reality is that we are all going to die. This idea of confronting our mortality to live lives of greater meaning and connection might be a law that should apply to all of the people. How would our lives be enhanced if we get ourselves into the feeling of the fear of death, into the feeling that we have in reading of the death of children, as we talked about earlier, of innocence? Does that motivate us? Maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe it pushes us more toward avoidance. Can't deal with it. Can't turn the news on today. Don't want to take care of my paperwork. Steve, I see your hand raised.
Yeah. So there's an expression that you say, Baruch Dayan Amet, right? God is a true judge. So rather than try to figure out answers or make sense of it, why does that expression apply? Because we'll never know, right? If this was going to happen that way, why did this? What? God's a true judge. How do we know? How do you explain the Holocaust? How do you explain anything else? So I'm just wondering how you apply that term retrospectively back then, right? Everything that happened for a reason. We have no answers.
Today, we still say it, Baruch Dayan Ha'emet. Blessed Baruch Dayan, judge, Ha'emet, the truth. We say this upon learning of the death of someone. We hear, oh, my neighbor died. Someone might say, Baruch Dayan Ha'emet. We say it often at the time before the funeral starts, if we're in a family where the clothing over our hearts is being torn. If we do that at the funeral before it starts, or we tear the black ribbon that's affixed that's given to us at the funeral home, it's another time it's said. I have a friend who's helped me to broaden my own thinking beyond the literal words. Baruch Dayan Ha'emet, right? Some may interpret this as blessed is the true judge, meaning only God is the one who judges when someone will die. The idea that Steve shared, that there's a reason for everything. I'm not sure that's a universally accepted idea, that there's a reason, right? When we talk about the death of innocence, with the death of children, untimely deaths, there are deaths that cannot be explained. And so I'm not sure about this idea of there being a reason. But what I like to understand Baruch Dayan Ha'emet to mean is blessed is the God of truth, right? We have this idea in other places whose Torah is true, right? Blessed is the God of truth. God knows what is true. The truth is that I loved my friend who died before his time. I learned this interpretation from my friend when I was officiating at the funeral for her husband who died at 60, before his time. Blessed is the God who knows what's true. I may not be able to understand that in my human understanding. Why did my friend die at 60 before his time with teenage children in the house? It shouldn't happen. Innocent children shouldn't be killed in war, right? I don't know what's true and what's not true when it comes to these situations with the literal meanings of it. But I know that my life is one that strives to understand a truth. And the truth is that I love these people. I was just saying to my kids, we're about to go sit at Passover, Seder, and many holiday meals with people we love, who we may disagree with when it comes to talking about the current situation in the news, any current situation in any part of the world, right? We can be talking about what's going on in Israel. We can be talking about what's going on in Ukraine and Russia. We can be talking about what's going on in my hometown in New York City. And we may sit at tables with people we love, who we disagree with about what's coming out of their mouths. They may disagree with what's coming out of our mouths. And I said to my children, it's our job to express our love for the people who we're sitting at the table with, because we love them. We're sitting with them because we love them. And we may still disagree with what they say, but we're there to show our love. We can be in relationship with people that we disagree with. And so it's a difficult idea to judge truth. I appreciate you bringing that up. But this idea that there should be one law for all the people, right? That innocence shouldn't be killed, it's a hard thing for us to grapple with when we're living in a time of universalism, right? Judaism has been a religion of particularism. We take care of those in our immediate midst in certain specific ways, and then we move further out in concentric circles. We have certain obligations of how, when we set up a new community, we should set that community up. What kinds of Jewish community institutions get built before others? We take care of making sure there's a cemetery before we build a school, for example, right? And we take care of the people closest to us with whom we have relationships before we take care of the people we don't have relationships with, right? We feed our own people in our own home before we turn and feed the poor in our community. We still have an obligation to feed the poor in our community, but there's a priority order in this idea of particularism, which is not unique to Judaism as a religion, right? It's not unique to our ethnic heritages. It is something that we have known of throughout time. And today we're living in a time of universalism, of humanitarian aid, right? And many of us may be dealing with generational struggles between the particularism of my grandparents and the universalism of my children. I just saw an advertisement for a program for parents who have kids coming home from college who may be, for Passover, who may be espousing different ideas about Israel, and how do we entertain them at the Passover Seder, right? We are in the business of promoting conversation, of wanting our kids to ask questions. And how do we engage in conversation with people we disagree with? This is all for another time and another place. But where I want to bring it back is this idea that we don't quite understand, but we can take with us, that there should be one law for all people. All people are mortal today, right? Cryogenics, you can invest in all the death tech and cryogenics you want. Maybe you'll be the first not to be mortal. Maybe your friend who invests in cryogenics will be the first to be brought back. Who knows? But the reality is that no matter what our political opinions, no matter how much we agree or disagree, that we are all mortal. And what are we going to use from this story in the Torah? What are we going to use from Jewish wisdom to take with us on this journey from narrowness, from getting stuck under the fear of completing the paperwork? It takes too much time. I have so many other things I need to do. Moving toward the expansiveness of, I've done my best. I may not get my wishes, but the people I love know what I want. I've figured out who I want to make decisions for me. And so with that, I'm going to offer just a few more remarks and then open it up for any general discussion. So, we're heading to Passover Monday night, less than a week away. And I hope that today's time together not only will inspire you to move beyond your own narrowness toward expansiveness, moving beyond what's holding you back, whether it's cleaning out the fridge, whether it's figuring out the meal plan, whether it's getting yourself invited to a meal, you haven't taken that step to say, I don't want to be alone yet, right? A lot of things hold us back from a lot of things happening that could be in our benefit. This idea of liberation, of freedom, of expansiveness, what might the feeling be on the other side, right? We accessed earlier the feelings about what happens after innocents die. What could the feeling be? What might we be able to feel if we've moved beyond what's holding us back? If we've moved into a place of expansiveness, we've done what we can, what's in our control, right? Someone mentioned earlier the things we can't control, to get our houses in order, whether that means our house in order for Passover or our lives in order, to live the rest of our lives with an acknowledgement that we are mortal. And so Shomer Collective is here to say, we don't need to be alone in any of this. We can help you to put your stuff in order. Maybe not literally to clean out your fridge for Passover, but we can help you to figure out who your healthcare proxy is going to be in the event you can't make a decision for yourself. We'll put a link in the chat to our next What Matters, Caring Conversations About End of Life program. We run them about quarterly online, open conversations. Many of you have participated. An opportunity to be part of a group of people having a Jewishly inflected experience of advanced care planning. Passover is a night of questions, right? We have the youngest at the Seder ask 4 questions. And so I want to leave you with this. What questions need to be asked in your life this year to help you taste that freedom in knowing that you can face your reality? What questions need to be asked in your life this year to help you taste freedom? The reality that you can face your mortality with just a little bit less fear and a little bit more openness. And I want to offer you the blessing that your journeys over the next few days, over the next few weeks, right? We're about to head into a 7-week period between the holiday of Passover and the holiday of Shavuot, a period in which we count the days. A lot of us have been counting days since October 7th. May your journeys be meaningful. May the counting of your days be meaningful. And may we all be blessed to reach the other side.
I have to say thank you. I have participated probably in various Zooms that you have presented for at least 2 years. And I am experiencing freedom because I finally put everything in order 2 months ago. So I want everybody to know you might not walk away from this session ready to do it, but keep signing up to do more sessions until you get the courage to move forward.
Marla, I need to thank you for the feeling that comes in knowing that your words don't go out into the ether to nowhere, but that by repeating them over and over, someone's life has been helped, and you have helped us to realize what's potential. Thank you, thank you. Miriam says in the chat, the Egyptians gave the Israelites their possessions. Unmute, Miriam.
It went out by mistake. But did the Egyptians prepare themselves for death by ridding themselves of stuff in a unanticipated, maybe unintentional way? Whereas the Israelites looted, took, borrowed, and left with wealth. Not exactly a humble exodus.
Right. Thanks, Miriam, again, for being our teacher and seeing two sides, two different perspectives, right? The Israelites looted, didn't have such a humble exit is one way of looking at that. And the other is that the Egyptians practiced the Swedish art of death cleaning. They unburdened themselves from their possessions, knowing that they too are mortal. They saw other people in their communities die, and they didn't want to be burdened with their messy houses left behind. So they signed up for the next Marie Kondo class, and they said, do I love these jeans or do I not love these jeans? Do I have a feeling of love toward these socks? Right? That stuff may not work for you. I may be making light and using humor, but to help us see that there are a lot of different perspectives that we can gain from looking at a text in the company of other people, from looking at a situation from more than one perspective. Do I really need this sarcophagus? I'm going to thank you all for joining us today, for spending this hour with the balm, as I like to say, of Torah study in a time of great difficulty for so many of us. And once again, may your journeys be meaningful, and may we all be blessed to reach the other side. Thank you.
Amen. Amen.
Thanks, everyone.